for quite some time. Everything that we did, I did, was permeated with a Bankish. And I was talking with some friends, whatever, Bankish. Our kids were there at the table, our kids, 16, 17, whatever. And one of my friends said to me, our kids have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know what you're talking about. Bankish to what?
Right,
Bankish
exactly.
to what?
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2024. My name is Bentzi, and I will be your host. Let's begin. All right, so I'm here with Rabbi Moshe Gourarie in Tammuz River, which is not Lakewood, but kind of is Lakewood at this point. Rabbi Moshe Gourarie is the founder, I think, of Project Likkutei Sichos, definitely one of the faces of Project Likkutei Sichos.
That's more like it.
And we will get to that project and the motivation behind it and the spirit behind it within the course of conversation for sure. Many people, I'm sure, who are listening to this podcast have also listened to Project Likkutei Sichos and probably Rabbi Gourarie's classes, and so we will get there. But I did want to start not even with where you come from, but with before you came from. Jump back 2 generations. I don't usually ask people to do that, but in some of the podcasts, at least one of the earlier podcasts, some people talked about Montreal and Rabbi Moshe Gourarie, who in a way is this kind of figure that those there are many who never heard of him, but then those who heard of him, they're like, what do you mean? He was this towering figure. And I think it'd be interesting if you could start off talking a little bit about him. Maybe where does this Gourarie chain come from?
Okay, so I can't talk about the Gourarie chain because it's much broader than just me and my family.
Right. But your Gourarie chain.
I can go back to my Zeda and Nassan Gourarie lived in Montreal. We would go there. I mean, he was a towering figure, but to me, he was my Zeda. And we used to enjoy going into his office. He was, I never saw him working. Maybe by the time I used to come around, he was partially retired. But he did have a parnasa, which is what he did, to make a living. But the passion of his life was learning chassidus. I remember after the Zeda, once, he sat down at the dining room table, about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, with the sefer, as if it was the middle of the day. I remember once, I was there for Pesach one year myself. My father, he had fallen during the winter, and he slipped on the ice, and he wasn't up to traveling. In those years, he would travel to one of his children for Pesach. I was 16 years old, and the first day of Pesach, after the Sudas Yontiv, which is when most people take a nap, because the Zeda the night before was late, the Zeda the night. Anyway, he asked me if I wanted to learn a little bit, so I said, of course. I said yes. And he sat down with me, and we started learning Matzah Zu, Samach Zayin, which is in the back of Samach Vav.
Sure.
And a little bit meant it was 2 hours, then 3 hours. I was never happier to go to Mincha, even though the whole way to Mincha, we continued to make sure I understood the Maimer. He had an incredible way of explaining things. He was speaking to me in Yiddish mostly, all in Yiddish, and Baruch Hashem, I understand Yiddish. But the way he presented the ideas was something that he was so familiar with. It was even to a child he was able to explain it, this was his life. I mean, I remember he would come. He came once. He would come to Detroit. I grew up in Detroit, so he would take the train from Montreal to Windsor. My father would pick him up in Windsor. So I once went with my father, to pick up Zeda. My father says, "Wie is gewend in Nesia? How was the ride?" So he says, "A ganz gute Nesia," and he showed the Sefer Pelech Harimen from Rebbe Paritcher that he learned along the way. That's what made it a comfortable ride, was the fact that he had good reading material. So,
but he wasn't an academic. He was he went to business. He lived in this world, right?
I don't know what you mean by academic, but he lived in this world. And
I'm saying an academic is someone whose job is to learn, right? They work in a university, and the professor kind of thing.
This was
He wasn't a mashpia. He wasn't.
he taught in the later years. He taught in one of the Chabad houses, one of the Chabad shuls there. But that's different years. The Bochur would come. He would teach. He just didn't look to teach. He wasn't looking to be a teacher or an academician. He enjoyed learning and understanding Chassidus. He enjoyed talking about it with someone that was on his level. It was always enjoyable to watch my father and him, discuss something. My father once told me that my grandfather, in the end of his life, had yana machla on his brain. So at one point, he went in for an operation. So when he woke up, he told my father, and they began to discuss Shvidus HaKelim.
Wow.
So this was his life. This was how he lived. Everything else was the fact that he made a living, and he did so, was because that's what you have to do, but that wasn't where his head was.
Well, because the reason I'm asking that or pointing that out is because, it's something that I've noticed is where, like, when you leave yeshiva, and then learning Chassidus in yeshivas is so connected to the atmosphere of the yeshiva, which is very unique because most of the world isn't yeshiva. Most yeshivas are not Lubavitch yeshivas. So it's a very few places where, let's say Matzazu of Samach Zayin is a thing. Most of the world, it's not a thing. Then you leave the yeshiva and it's like, okay, nobody else seems to care about this. My wife doesn't know what I'm talking about even, and a lot of my friends or people that I'm around aren't interested. And so for me, I wouldn't say it was an excuse to kind of let it dwindle, but it was hard to maintain that excitement or that intensity, that interest in this thing where it becomes essentially a very private, and it's just you in many ways, right? There's fewer and fewer people with which you can engage on this, and that's why it's so interesting to hear how someone who was a businessman, and I understand what you're saying, that he wasn't about business, but someone who didn't have the comfort of being surrounded by yeshiva bachrim the whole day, and where what he's learning is what he's teaching, and so it's that's his. He's in the world, and he still is learning. Not even, it doesn't sound even like out of Kabbalah, so more pashut, because this is his life. This is what he enjoys. And it didn't seem like he didn't even write svarim about it. It was just him.
He actually wrote a bunch of stuff, but it's almost impossible to print unless someone was to take it and elucidate it.
So it was notes. It was notes.
Yeah.
I'm saying he wasn't out to publish and to write books. I just think it's just a beautiful example of that personal, private joy of learning Chassidus that someone had.
100%. And to be fair, I think it's fair to mention his father, who I'm named after, Moshe Gourarie,
sure,
who was also a businessman and was an askin. And once he came to Eretz Yisrael, he was involved in Agudas Chabad, and he too was well known. I mean, I think he was a little bit more out there than my grandfather was.
What do you mean out there?
More teaching and more.
Sure. What didn't he teach Rebbe? Wasn't he one of Rebbe's teachers?
Well, I don't know if he was officially his teacher. I mean, my Zeda and Rebbe were chavrusis.
Your Zeda Nosson?
My Zeda Nosson and Rebbe were chavrusis. They learned together in Eretz Yisrael. And even here when they came to New York. Mm-hmm. So they certainly crossed paths, and they lived in the same area in Tel Aviv.
And they maintained relationships later on in life?
Yes.
They did?
Yes. Not, to my best of my knowledge, when my Zeda would come to New York, he'd visit Rebbe Yael, and they would talk usually about the latest, about the Mamorim. My Zeda, I know that in his house, the Sefrei HaMamorim, Melukit, even though I heard people say things about it, but I know that they were in his house, they were well used.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. That's really interesting, because I think what you're referring to is, there's, some people pay more attention to the fact that Rebbe was involved in Malukit, and some people pay less attention to that, I think is a nice way of putting it. Okay. Right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what you're referring to. Did Rebbe change it up, or, that it's clear that the Mamorim are different in Malukit than they are in the recorded versions. And so it's very interesting.
as the Rebbe wanted.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. But I'm saying it's interesting that someone like your grandfather, who was his friend, and in many ways could therefore say, I know this guy. Like, I'm going to take his take on it that seriously. You're saying he did.
And he may have disagreed with him on certain things.
Seder.
Certain approaches, certain things. But nevertheless,
Right.
it was, I mean, I have actually somewhere in the house a stack of the Rebbe's Ma'amarim, when they came out as Kontresim, and he collected them all, he learned every single one of them.
Right, which leads me to my next point. And I don't want to make this podcast all about your Zeda, but I think it's going to feed into the rest of the conversation. Because there was someone else who spoke about him. Maybe it was Reuven Lee, or maybe it was even someone else, who had gotten to know him in Montreal. And, they weren't a grandson, so I don't know how much they got to know him and how much they saw of him. But in their mind, here's this person who kind of keeps to himself, loves learning Chassidus, but he's not like involved. It didn't seem like he was involved in all the pa'ulis and all the kind of activities and stuff going on. And so it didn't seem so much like a Der Shvi kind of guy. Like he's almost like he's a throwback to a different time. And I remember you commented to me at the time that that's not how I remember him. So I mean, talk a little bit about. I'm not asking you to defend your Zeda's honor here, but what I would ask you is, when you were growing up, you grew up in a very Der Shvi kind of atmosphere. We can get to that soon. How did you place your Zeda in this whole, space? Like, how did he fit in for you? Like, because he wasn't a shliach, right? Was he officially a shliach? He wasn't a shliach. He wasn't in the yeshivas. He's like how did you see him? Where did he fit in your mind to Der Shvi, to being a chassid?
Well, at the time, I wouldn't have even known to differentiate.
Interesting.
Like my father, despite being more Der Shvi oriented, if you will.
Right.
But what did I see of my father? Learning. When I was a kid, my father would sit late at night and learn Chassidus mostly.
Yeah, right.
When he taught Nigla, he taught Gemara to mesivta Bochur. But at night he would sit and learn. I remember when a new sefer would come, whether it was from the Friedrich Rebbe or from the Rebbe, I didn't at the time understand the distinction of each one. But my father liked to learn. My father sat and learned for hours.
Right.
So I saw my Zeda doing the same thing. I mean, if I was to look back now, I would say to you that some of the, for the lack of a better term, shtick that became synonymous with Der Shvi, my Zeda didn't buy into that.
Didn't buy into that.
Not so much because he disagreed with it, just because it wasn't his nature, it wasn't his personality.
He was busy learning.
So he was doing his thing,
right.
And this is how he was. This is how he became a chassid, if you will, and this is how he was a chassid, and this is how he always was.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because so much of these categories that are made up are very often just made up. Like okay, a Der Shvi chassid. Why? What exactly defines a Der Shvi chassid? That he doesn't learn. You know what I mean? No, I don't think anybody seriously thinks that that's a definition. But it can quickly become silly. Of okay, you are on the right side of things, or you're on the wrong side of things on this made up category, right? And what you're saying, it seems like, is that someone may come and say, "Oh, this guy's father was Der Shvi because X, Y, Z, and this guy's grandfather was Der Shishi because X, Y, Z," but really they were doing the same thing, right? Meaning the categories, you don't have to play ball with the categories, is what it sounds to me. You don't have to defend that. No, even according to your made up category is also Der Shvi.
Keep in mind that my Zeda, at least, I mean, I don't know so much about later on, but when he was a Bochur, I don't know how to say. I'm saying he knew the Rebbe personally. The Rebbe knew him personally. The Rebbe wrote to his father about him. Called him. He's a Nechba Lakelim.
You're saying when he came
to New York,
he came with Rebbe on Yud
Shvat, and then they asked the Rebbe what to do, and the Rebbe told him to stay. So they stayed, and he was a Bochur. He got married in, I believe, Tashin Yud Gimmel.
Right.
So for those few years, he was a 770 Bochur.
And why did he end up in Montreal?
Because I don't know, but probably because his wife was from Montreal.
Oh, his wife was from Montreal. Oh, that makes sense.
My grandmother, her maiden name, her maiden name is Chaikin. She's an older sister of Beryl Chaikin by many, many years.
The one in
Cleveland. Her father was Meir Chaim Chaikin. He was a Rav in Montreal at the time. He had come from Gruzia.
Very interesting.
I don't know that's why, but I'm guessing that might be the connection. But
yeah, I think it's an important point. Maybe you take it for granted, and maybe people listening also don't know what I'm going on about. But I think like so much like this label of Der Shvi it becomes so silly so quickly, and it becomes useless. It becomes useless because here's your grandfather.
It depends on the context, though. I'm sorry to interrupt you, because Der Shvi is the Rebbe's Rebbe coined it.
No, I'm not saying Der Shvi is a silly thing. Calling someone Der Shvi and deciding who is and who isn't, that kind of thing. Because Der Shvi is an idea, right? Der Shvi is an idea. Once it becomes a label, it's a different thing. It becomes like a status of are you in or are you out? Like here's your Zeda who, is not. One person says, "Oh, he didn't look like a Der Shvi person." Yeah, but his Mamar Malukit were worked through. We're worked through. So why is that not Der Shvi? Why is that Der Shvi? I think, and maybe his personality was more a learning person, so maybe he wasn't involved in the big pull list or the outward stuff. Maybe he was. Maybe we don't know about it. Who knows? But that's another way to be a Der Shvi person, is to learn the chassidus of Der Shvi. I don't know. I think I'm pointing it out enough. But no, but I think it'll come into the conversation because, it's certainly, to me, I can already see how it. I asked you a question and you're like, it was never even a question to me. And I think that will play a role. As a storyteller, I'm somewhat convinced that that's going to play a role down the line. We'll see if I'm right.
All right.
We'll see if I'm right. Okay, so your Zeda was Rabbi Moshe Gourarie, who lived in Montreal. Your father is Rabbi Moshe Gourarie, who was the Bankish, but mainly known as a mashpia in Detroit for many years. And while I never learned in Detroit, I did have the enjoyment of hearing of your shurim from your father over the years. And I can say, and I know many others say, that the best shurim I ever heard and we ever heard. Very, very rigorous, I think would be the best word. It was never it was never ideas coming from the sky and like falling into the mimer. It was all worked out from the mimer and very rigorous and very serious, and everything had to be earned, right? There was no easy way out. This is someone who harvit is the Yiddish word for it. So talk a little bit about growing up in that kind of atmosphere and what that was like.
Well, I grew up, as you said, I grew up in Detroit. I grew up in a very idyllic, shtetl-like, chassidish shtetl. Right. My father and his friends, the other younger light his age, verbringed every Shabbos. Not every Shabbos, verbringed often, and they'd verbring together. There were some older, maybe 10 years older than my parents, my father, who were durchgetanen chassidische Yidden. I'll mention one because he's in Eilam Ha'emes, but Itchemer Kagan. Okay. On the one hand, was a very on the surface would look as like a very balabatisha person. He was a shliach and he was involved with balabatim, and he dressed sort of what we would, at least for us little boys, we would consider it balabatish. But he was a yid who learned chassidus every single morning. We can hear him through the window learning chassidus. Shabbos he would daven barichas. He was like, maybe we didn't appreciate it at the time, but I'm just giving a dugma of someone who was the Rebbe shliach, was dedicated to the Rebbe b'leiv nefesh. At the same time, he learned chassidus. One time, by Bitim and Chamayrav, we needed someone didn't have a mimer. One of the Bochur hadn't prepared a mimer to chazer. So I went over to him and I said, "Benny Chance, could you maybe say something?" He said, "No, Sfartim Tashing Yud Aleph," like as if it was his phone number. Saying in those days when people knew phone numbers, but what I'm saying, he was living with it. I'm saying, and him is just one name amongst many, and it was a very Rebbe-centric life. And we went to New York many times a year, and especially later on when I got a little older. And there was chalukis, if we knew in advance, we would try to get there in time. There was giving out kuntresim or svarim. To know what was going on, I remember at a certain point in our basement, we had a copy machine, a few copy machines, and the Bochur would get the likkut every Friday from some office that had a fax machine, and they would copy it and print it in our basement. Later, we ourselves, in other words, the next class of Bochur got the fax machine in our house, so everything that came through, the taksir, the rad, the yumanim, I was there. I lived in that basement for those years, so I watched everything come in. I didn't understand everything. Wasn't able to follow everything, but I was part of it. I was growing up with the Rebbe because I knew everything that was going on, and when I was old enough, I would ask one of the older Bochurim to learn with me, whether it was the Likkutei Sichos or the mesivta. And the discussion, the conversation that came Tevis, the time leading up to Tevis or Chav B'Shvat, or the avir that I was in, the environment that I was in, was a very chassidish and a very Rebbe-focused environment.
It's interesting because you started off describing Detroit in a way that sounded almost like one of the old Lubavitch communities. I don't know, one person will say Neville, another person will say, I don't know, Klimovich. I don't know enough of the history of which one it's the most similar to. But then you mentioned the thing about the faxes and all the faxes coming in. And I wonder, because in those days, earlier on in Russia, let's say, if you were in a town or a village, you lived there, you were very present there. Yeah, maybe once a year you went to Lubavitch or whatever, you got a letter here and there, but communication was very, very sparse. Travel was very, very sparse. You were present to where you were. Whereas here it sounds almost like there was a tension between being in Detroit and being part of this very rich atmosphere that's in the here and now, and at the same time being, this fax machine pinging every day with updates and your manim and all the actions over there actually. How did that play? Did it play a role, and how did that play a role in your mind when you're growing up? How do you manage to be both here and also there?
So when I used the term shtetl, I didn't mean that we were locked in or isolated. I meant more that there was the environment was very not megushimdik, very not focused on gasmistic things. We lived very basically, and we lived very happily. And but the center of our lives was the Rebbe.
Right.
And therefore, when we were able to go, we went. Remember times that my father couldn't take me or whatever it is, and me begging to go, and being devastated when I couldn't go.
No, but did you feel like you were away? Did you feel that you were away from New York?
Well, to be fair, there was also a very, very big a very great pride about being on shlichus.
Uh-huh.
So even though my father is in the world of chinuch, but the fact that we were not in New York and we didn't grow up literally at the Rebbe's feet was because we were on the Rebbe's shlichus.
Right.
And that gave us a sense of pride that despite the fact that we weren't living by the Rebbe literally, but we did as much as we can from where we were. But to be fair, to talk about your attention, I remember talking with my friends when we were kids. The trajectory was that as soon as we finished 2 years of mesivta in Detroit, we were going to Alatera, not for Alatera, but so that we could be Bochurim and be every day by the Rebbe. That was the goal. The goal was you grow up,
right,
and you do everything you're supposed to do until you're old enough to reach heaven,
right,
and that was to grow up as a Bochur and be every day by the Rebbe,
right,
which
has a history.
No, in my case, it didn't actually happen.
We're gonna get there, but that has a history in Lubavitch, right? Because in Lubavitch, at least from the founding of Tenchet Tmimim, very few Chassidim actually lived in Lubavitch, but the Bochurim would live there in the yeshiva, right? They were the yeshiva, the main yeshiva at least was by the Rebbe, even if the Rebbe Rashab was less. I think was less available less public than the Rebbe was later on, and for many times he was away for months at a time. But they were literally down the street from the Rebbe Rashab's courtyard, chutzner, right? So I mean, there is a tradition of that. But yeah, I mean, it just sounds. I think it's an interesting tension to point to. It's also what you added about it being on shlichus is also in a way interesting because, like, in a way, shlichus like sends you to a place, but you always feel like this isn't my. I'm here because I'm sent here. I'm not here because it's my place. Right, so on one hand, I have to be here because that's where I was sent, but on the other hand, I'm only here because I was sent, like not because, right? That's the paradox of it, right?
I have a taich in Keilodin that it's all about shlichus. So smeichim b'tzeisam v'sasim b'vayam.
Right.
Smeichim b'tzeisam, they're happy to go out.
And happy to come
but
back.
Sasim b'vayam, not come back forever. When they come back to see the Rebbe, there's a simcha that we get to come back every once in a while.
Right. It's interesting because, I mean, not to go into a whole spiel about shlichus, but I mean, it's just in terms of thinking of it, just like how the mind grapples with it. You know, you are both here and not here at the same time. It's an interesting kind of way to live, right?
But I think a lot of the question is coming from the fact that we're not there anymore, not physically in that space, but physically in that time.
Why?
Because at the time there was no tension. You were where you belonged. And part of being there was knowing that there was a space or there was something that you have to always remain connected to.
Right, but you wanted to go back there, right? So you, as a Bochur, wanted to grow up and go to 770.
Because within the structure there was a time where it was the right thing to do to be there. Because that's what Bochur did.
But that's what you wanted. You said that's what you wanted.
But I didn't want to live there for the rest of my life, necessarily.
Right, but hagufa. So al karchat chayv, al karchat meis is that there's the same idea where both are true at the same time, right? You don't want to be here, but once you're here, you also don't want to leave here, but you also don't want to be here in the first place, right? So it's a constant.
But you have to go back to the same constant. It's the Rebbe.
Right.
The Rebbe. I want to have a connection and a relationship with the Rebbe. And therefore, I want to see the Rebbe,
right.
And I want to hear from the Rebbe and see and be as close as possible. I also want to do what the Rebbe wants from me,
right.
And what the Rebbe wants from me is sometimes to not be there.
Right. So that's my point. I'm not saying it's a bad tension or that it's a stira. The tension sometimes is a paradox where the two things are both true, and because they're both true, and because you have to hold both of them at the same time, you have to live with these two
Balance.
Well, I don't know if the word's balance. It seems the word I think is tension. It's you want to be here on shlichus, but you also want to be there to see the Rebbe, right? That's what it sounds like. And so, as a human being that can only be in one place, if you're here, you're not there, and if you're there, you're not here.
I like the word balance because when you're talking in the world of ruchnius,
right.
two opposites can coexist.
Seder. You're saying so. You're talking in Indian. I'm talking about, but as physical human beings,
you can love your parent and you can love your child, and they're not hostile to each other. Even though loving your child means doing A, and loving your parent means doing something else. Sometimes.
But let's say I love my child and I send them to camp. Let's say, right, and so I send them to camp because I think that's what's best for them. But I also miss them. I want them home. So both of those things are true, and because we're human beings, we have to live with these conflicting emotions. Where on one hand, I am happy and pushing them to go to camp, but at the same time, I want them to come back. I mean, it's something actually now already we're kind of circling back to a conversation, or something that has an earlier conversation on the podcast, but I don't mean to keep on going back to other conversations. There is a tension there in shlichus, and I'm not saying this to try to poke holes or anything. For Keret, I think it's part of life. Any worthwhile endeavor, anything that's worth its salt has a tension in it, right? Because otherwise you're just swimming along with the current. But when you say that the Rebbe had such simcha by the kinus hashluchim, right? Or you could even go away from shlichus, the simcha that the Rebbe had with the Archim for Tishrei, right? But then there was a goodbye at the end, and it was hard. You could see, and the Rebbe would say, "Mamarim al yipater adam mechavere," right? Like this was real. It was real. It was real. It was real for the Chassidim. It was real for the Rebbe. It was real for the shlichus. It was real for the Rebbe. Like, I think the only difference is that with Eretz Yisrael, like that's where they happened to live. It wasn't in many cases Rebbe's choice that they lived there. That's where they lived. Whereas with shluchim, never sent them out to places, and so that was a choice where people were distant for a while. I think it's just an interesting tension to point out.
But I want to comment on that.
Sure.
I want to say I had this conversation about. I mean, it's going to sound off topic, but I'll about schools that don't teach English.
Okay.
And so some children feel, they feel lacking when they grow up. And I said, when I grew up, I didn't learn English.
Right.
And Baruch Hashem, it hasn't affected me negatively, at least to the best of my knowledge. But I do understand that some people struggle with that.
Right.
And someone asked me about it, and this was when the whole discussion about in New York State, when there was.
Right.
And I said that one of the things that I think is important is if you're going to not teach your child English, you have to give them pride in that. They have to understand why, and they have to believe in it. Because later on, they can look back at it. They might disagree with you,
right,
and they might be upset at you. I'm not saying that's guaranteed that they're going to agree with you. But for me, I was proud of the fact that I belonged to this select group of people that didn't learn English.
Right.
And it was inculcated in me. So later, I don't look back with a disappointment at my parents or at my educators because I understand where they were coming from, and they did it from that way. And I think it's very, very important in the world of shlichus, or it's referring to the comment about that other podcast that you just mentioned, and that despite the hardships of shlichus, or for that matter, even if not shlichus, even if you live in anywhere, wherever it might be, that's difficult, or far from family, or far from New York, or far from anything, and there could be a sense of disappointment, or with the parents that they went there, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying this works across the board and it fixes everything,
right,
but one of the things that's necessary is to give a child a sense of pride in where they are and why they're growing up differently, and not just hope that it's all going to work out. To say, I'll send them to yeshiva when they get older, and that'll fix it. But to revel in being different, rather than try to be as the same as everybody else, and hope that it all falls together. And so you can call it tension, or you can call it whatever, saying if it's done in a healthy way, and from childhood, the tension is oiled. It's made to feel less as a tension. It becomes easier for the child to live with it and to grow from it.
Right.
Rather than it becoming a tension that ultimately becomes a paradox, and the kid doesn't know where to go from there.
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think I can concede that focusing too much on the tension can make it more of a problem than it needs to be.
But focus on the positive.
I would never suggest that, when you're raising your child, you point out to them the contradictions of life, and press the two things. But at the same time, looking back, I think it's interesting. I think it's valuable to notice these kind of inherent tensions that exist, because it's not to point to say, oh, this is therefore a problem. A tension isn't a problem. At least that's not how I mean it here. How I mean it is that it opens up the let's say the layers and the textures to what's going on here, so that people have a better this makes sense. Okay, I get it. Or for example, like I think even to your exact point about teaching English, for example, when a child knows that they don't learn English, why they don't learn English. And I would also add, I think the most important thing is that the biggest hadgasha is that they learn a lot of Limudei Kodesh. It shouldn't be so much what they don't learn, but what they do learn instead, right? I think when the focus is on the not but that's a whole separate parsha. But when you point out the reasonings, and you point out that there's a trade-off here, or you may not be able to, it may be harder to go to law school, but there's a reason why we're doing this. it may sound like you're pointing out attention, but really you're pointing out the reasoning. And so later on in life, when a person maybe changes his mind or life takes a different path and he looks back at it, even if that wouldn't have been the thing that he would have done knowing what he knows now, he can look back and say, okay, I understand why that was done. I understand why that happened. So it's not to point holes and to say, you see, there's a problem here, or this can't work. It's to say, this is what it is. This is what is involved in it, and it leads to all kinds of things. It explains all kinds of things down the road. That's all I'm trying to.
I once heard of art, it's not from the Likkutei Sichos.
Okay, but, we're gonna get there.
But the lecturer was saying, "Ubacharta b'chaim leman tichi ate v'zerecha." You should choose life so that you and your children should live. So the question is, why v'zerecha? Obviously, if you're alive, I'm saying like.
Right.
So he said like this: "Ubacharta b'chaim." If you choose life, Yiddishkeit. If you do it because you want to do it,
right.
You revel in it, you enjoy it, then then your children will want to do it too.
Right.
But if you're a martyr,
Beautiful,
you're doing so because your father did it because you had no choice, and you feel like I have to, then your children are going to say, "Okay, Tati was a martyr. No, our parents were martyrs. Why should I be a martyr?"
Yeah.
And that's really the point I was making about explaining things, and that is that when the children see that you're happy. Not that nothing's hard. They know that life is hard sometimes, and whether it's whatever it is. But when they see that as the leps mit them,
right,
then this is something that they want to emulate.
Right.
And they may get older and decide no, but they'll have a different attitude to it because they didn't live a life of. I can't use the word tension because that's like the word here, but it wasn't a difficult life because even though things weren't perfect, it came with the ubacharta b'chaim.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah. When ultimately when something is chosen and something is imbued with love, at the very worst, you say, okay, that wasn't for me, but I'm not upset about it because it came from a place of love, right? And hopefully you stick with it, right? For your child, if you believe that what you're doing is the right thing, then hopefully your child sticks with it. But at the very worst, they can look back and what they will find is love and goodwill, sincerity, and good faith. So let's go back to this story that you're telling. So you're in Detroit. There's a young Bochur waiting to get to Ola Torah. And then, like you said, it didn't happen. But first of all, so it seems like at that time, you're in this shtetl, there's other shtetlach, there's other kind of vinkelach of Lubavitch, but everybody would kind of melt. It was like Old Torah was a melting pot. Was that how it was?
Look, I never made it to Ola Torah.
So but I'm trying to understand the mindset.
I knew from camp when the Bochur would come. Who were the Bochur that we looked up to?
Camp is Detroit.
Camp. Detroit,
right?
But who were the guys we looked up to? All these Bochur. I didn't even know Ola Torah 770. They came. These are the Bochur. Mitzvah Shabbos. When I was 12 years old, I would sneak out and listen to Chazara under the window of the office because a bunch of the Bochurim would, as soon as Shabbos was over, they would run to hear Chazara. There was an environment that as we were here, we have to be here, we're supposed to be here, but at the same time, we're missing. We missed the Fabrengen, and we want to know what the Rebbe said and what happened.
So which year was this in camp? Like, give me the late Mems, the early Nuns?
No, but I mean. Probably Tavshin. My last year as a camper was Tavshin and Aleph.
Nun Aleph.
I was almost bar mitzvah.
Right. So you're saying that even in the corners of Lubavitch and even in these different kind of corners of Lubavitch at that time there's one Fabring and there's one thing going on, and so that's the melting pot.
I can't talk about all the corners, but from where I was.
Well, Detroit was a pretty distinct corner.
Fine. I can only talk about my where I grew up, and going to camp was a very big part of that because that's when we got a taste of being around the older Bochurim. And when I was in Detroit had a mesivta. So, like I'm saying, in the second half of the 80s, there was mesivta. So by the time you were 15, 16 years old, you left. So the Bochurim that were older than that, some of which were much older than me, and I'm still friends with them until today from those times at camp. This was like a taste of Leb mit Rebbe, of Chassidische Bochurim.
Right.
So there was a big, and then when we would come to New York and we would see
Your counselors.
the counselors, the staff, sometimes they would push us in, they would schlep us in. I remember being carried over the shoulders by a few Bochurim so I could be closer to the Rebbe's Fabrengen. Just a funny anecdote, but I remember once standing by the Rebbe's place right before the Fabrengen, about 1:15, 1:20, and two guys that I knew from camp. I won't say them by name, but they were killing each other. They were They were fighting over a place.
Oh, place.
But, and on the way home after Fabrengen, I met up with my father, and I was walking. And I said them by name. I said, this guy and this guy, sie haben sich geschlagen. So my father said, jeder einer hat gestubt dem anderen nicht zum Rebbe. Each one was pushing the other one closer to the Rebbe. That was, you're talking about, creating a positive twist. So it was, to me, it's something I remember till today. It was like a very beautiful way of explaining what was happening.
Right.
That they weren't fighting with each other. They were just trying to get closer. Anyway.
Yeah, but you don't buy it all these years later.
I'm saying I know what went on.
Yeah, I'm saying so. No, but the Bochurim that were coming for camp, they themselves were like from the Detroit Yeshiva? Not necessarily.
No.
That's what I'm pointing to. So there was this. It's very interesting because at the time there was this melting pot of there wasn't this place, that place. Everywhere ends up calling the hardest.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all ends up there.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened over there. I mean, we all know what happened, but tell me what it was like.
I was sitting in Mishmar. Mishmar was what we called the 6 to 7:30 p.m. class
In Detroit.
My father was our teacher. He would teach us Likkutei Sichos. And someone came in, told my father he has a phone. There's a phone call for him. So he got up and he went to take the phone, and then he came back 2 minutes later and he said until. And so right away, the older guys, I was 13 and a half. But the older guy, the next class up, they right away went out to find out what happened. And we heard the Rebbe's gefallen. That's what they told us. And it made sense because the Rebbe had been having pain with his leg.
Right.
So we thought it was a leg thing. Then we found out that it was not just a leg thing.
And how soon did people realize that?
Very soon. Very, very soon. Very, very soon. Maybe that night, next day. Very, very soon. I mean, I don't know if we understood as we were young. I don't know if we understood
what it meant, yeah.
The severity of it and the what it meant. But Rebbe Moshe, we could say that was the end of my childhood. I mean, not in a bad way. I'm saying like there was a trajectory, and then
absolutely,
and at that point, whatever, and then our as much as until that point of Megillah mit Rebbe. Like in a certain way, from that point and on, it was different. But it was the Rebbe was present in our hearts and in our minds every single day, every single minute. Like when there was a Fabrengen, what was Fabrengen about? We have something has to change within us, so that should bring the Rebbe more nachas, the Rebbe should become gesund. Like everything, even the external things that were going on in New York that was not related to things that we were supposed to know or be involved in, but we knew what was going on, and this would be a little off the learning topic and a little more into the arum topic, but of being a chassid. But what was going on by the Rebbe was very important to us. So
you were planning to go to Altera shortly after? Like, what was the trajectory? The trajectory was.
I don't know. I was my first year mesivta, so I would have done at least one other year mesivta, maybe 2 more years mesivta, depending on whatever it is.
But you never ended up going to Altera.
I never ended up going to Altera. I did 3 years mesivta on Beis, on Gimmel, on Daled, on my 3 years of mesivta in Detroit.
Right.
Mesivta ended a few weeks early.
Because of Gimmel Tammuz.
Yes. And then the next year they opened a yeshiva in Detroit. So I stayed there for 2 more years.
So you were the first class.
There was 2 classes. I was the younger of the 2 classes, but yeah.
So in a sense, everything did change. Like the entire path changed. At the time, At the time, how did you? I mean, I'm going to start off the question in a very kind of clumsy way, but hopefully we'll figure out a way to get to. How did you process this, or was there a point where, like, did it feel natural? Like, because it's easy to look back and say, well, it seems abrupt, but it did happen over the course of a few years. Like, was there a point where you felt like, okay, I was supposed to be here and now I'm over here, like I've taken a completely different path? Was there a point that you felt that? Or it just felt like one thing led to another?
I don't know if it's supposed to be here or supposed to be there, but there was a major letdown. We felt like the rug was pulled out from under our feet, and I mean, it's not just because we were supposed to end up there. It's because we lived in a world where Atot Kont Mashiach, and it was everything was real. It was like it was. We were at the very, very end of whatever it was, and then, I mean, we still believed it then, and we still believe it now that we're at the very, very end of it, but it was harder to envision, and everything that we felt was rightfully ours. And I say everything because I know that over time we've learned that, there's a lot of connection that's still available and still possible, and we still live with the Rebbe. But at that time, it was I don't know. I can't tell you, how many days or how many months or how many years it took. But at the beginning, right away, it was also right away. There was this feeling of what now,
right.
And also you have to understand that nobody was there to guide us. Certainly not right in the beginning.
What's the pshat? Nobody was there.
Everyone was reeling. I think that the people that were our teachers and our parents weren't reeling. They were reeling. They didn't either know how to.
Right.
As a matter of fact, if you would say the older people who seemed to embrace the situation, I don't want to say easier, or easier is not the right word, but more seamlessly than like we looked at them like they were. I did, like they were crazy.
Like the more elegant they dealt with it, the more out of touch it would seem to you.
Yeah, I remember we started the yeshiva in Detroit. Oh, never mind. I can't do never mind, right? Anyway, I was just saying, one of the older shlichim whom I respected then, I respect today, a person that I respect greatly. He gave a very significant donation to start a library
in the yeshiva.
So he worded out the plaque that would be on the Sfarim Shafa, which was going to be on the Mizrach wall. Sifriya L'Teiras Kvektuzos Adinenu Merenu V'Rabbeinu Zitzukal Hanav Gamzia. And this is Cheshvan or Kislev of Tavshin and Hey. And I went to my father and I said, we're not hanging this up. In other words, we can't. In other words, we know what the right thing is, we know, but to put these words up on the Mizrach wall, to have to look at it every day, it's not happening. And of course, at the end, my father said, "I folged in the Eltere," and I folged, and I listened, and I put it up. But I'm saying there was it was hard to look at.
It's hard to look at reality.
Hard to look at. It was,
right.
it was, and I was saying I haven't been there in a long time, but that sign would still bother me today. Not to put it up today, but the fact that somebody was comfortable enough to put it up then, there's a certain like feeling of not understanding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's I was too young I was 5-6 years old and I lived in Hong Kong, so I can't speak to it from personal experience, but in a way that's what fascinates me, because childhood and growing up, it's all about kind of projecting the future, like what the life ahead of you. And it's very similar when you hear stories of children that grew up and then there's a war, and like their whole kind of future basically gets ripped out from in front of them. And like on one hand, children are like the least equipped to deal with it because they have they've been protected in general and they have the least life experience. And in a way, they have the most to lose. It's like a double whammy, right? Because it's not like they have their whole life behind them, and it's like, okay, so we're gonna live with the memories, Okay, fine, we had a good run here, right? It's like, no, what do you mean? Like, you're stealing my entire future here. Like, this is all I got, right? And this is everything. And I also don't know how to process it. And so, like, that's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like this, this moment in time where, because to unpack it just a little bit, there's always I hate to use the word again. There's always a tension between generations, right? There's different. This is throughout history. In Yiddishkeit, it's the whole story of Yiddishkeit. It's a Seder Pesach. It's how do you communicate one generation to the next? How do you take the values, these timeless values that work for you, God willing, and transmit to the next generation who lives in a different situation and comes to the world from a different place. They're your child, but they're also from the world.
Did I just lose you?
No. Did you? No, I think you just heard this sound.
Oh, okay.
You're not hearing me?
No, I think I hear you.
Yeah. No, we're still recording. How do you hear me now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How about now?
Once again. Talk again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing you from here.
Yeah, you're hearing me from there. Just getting used to it.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, Rav. But how do you communicate timeless values from one generation to the next? That's a whole endeavor of Yiddishkeit, right? And so there's always this space between generations, and like it sounds like up to Gimmel Tammuz, yeah, your father is in his world, your grandfather's in his world, you're in your world, but you're all a bunch of planets revolving around the sun, in the sense that there's a core here. We know what's going on. We all kind of are seeing the same picture, maybe from different places, but it's all the same picture. And then that gets yanked out from underneath you, and suddenly this older guy he's coming. He's like, "Oh, do you mean this is how it has to be? We're not going to get carried away with feelings that could lead to a very dangerous place. We have to be stoic and real, right?" For him, that works. You're like, wait a second, this is crazy. You know what I mean? That's what I'm hearing. It's like, it's not just a traumatic event or whatever the word would be, or catastrophic event for the younger generation. It also rips apart the generations themselves, right? Because now, how do you communicate? Does that make sense? Because that's what that anecdote tells me. That anecdote tells me that suddenly the generations have a hard time communicating with one another.
But we're having the conversation though a bunch of years later.
Right.
So now we have the benefit of hindsight.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to understand if that's what happened then. I think it could be repaired.
I think that did happen, and I think that if we'll be honest with ourselves, the healing of that let's call it trauma. It's not the right word, but.
Well, it's just an overused word, so now everything.
Correct. So the healing of the effects of that expectation and that not being filled, and not only that, but also there was a bunch of things that were happening that stopped happening, that were supposed to, in our minds, supposed to be happening. But what happens is that we end up in immersing ourselves either in the Rebbe's Rishimis that started to come out shortly thereafter, in Mivtzoyim, in shlichus, in Farbrengens, and because we're immersed still in the Rebbe, so while it doesn't take away, at least certainly not then, or not entirely at least, the pain, but it still gives you a reason to live, and it gives you a feeling of connection, and it gives you a reason to continue doing what you're doing.
I wasn't chas v'shalom trying.
I didn't say you were.
No, yeah, no. I'm saying I wasn't. My point was not to say that everything came to an end. I think it's just that anecdote that you talked about, because this is something that I'm fascinated about. In many ways, the whole podcast is about that, because you have Lubavitch, right? Let's say Lubavitch is made up of different ages, different experiences, different backgrounds, or like any community, right? And I think especially after Gimmel Tammuz, the shared experience came under a lot of pressure, right? Because what is even the shared experience? One generation wants it to be zechrenis. Another generation says it's not enough. Another generation says we want more. You know,
One second. I always say, don't confuse Jews and Judaism.
right,
You know, there's Chassidim and there's Chassidus.
right,
So Lubavitch, if you will, is made up of everything.
right.
But there's Chassidim, and in Chassidim there's going to be different ages and different approaches
Right.
and different feelings. This one's Chesed, this one's Gvura,
Right.
and there Beisil, Beishamai.
Right.
But there's also Chassidus, and
Yeah.
Chassidus is emes. Chassidus is nitzchi.
So just to point out, what I said earlier was going to come up in the conversation came up just for
Okay.
those holding record, just for those for holding cheshbon. The point that I said was going to come up earlier. Yeah.
Remind me how. Tell me the connection.
Oh, you said that your Zeda being the importance of being able to be a der shvi chassid, but also being someone who learns chassidus, and seeing it that way through the framework of learning.
Yeah.
It comes up now.
But in Chassidus itself, there's the limud of Chassidus.
Right.
Then there's the inyan of Chassidus, the idea
Right.
that was started by the Baal Shem Tov,
Right,
with the
right.
Alter Rebbe, and that goes on till Mashiach comes.
Right.
And beyond.
100%. And I think ultimately that is the most optimistic part of all of this, which is at the core, right? Because anything in this world will eventually come under pressure. Any idea, any project will come under pressure. So the question becomes, what does it have at its core? Like how strong is this? Yeah, it may get some cracks and some scratches, but what's there? Like, you know, what's going to survive, or is it going to survive? And that depends on what is it at its core. And what you're saying is that at its core,
Yeah,
it's emes, and so it's in a way you could say from the get-go it's irrelevant, all this pontification and because in a sense it's all shtusim, because at its core
the manifestations will change.
Okay, so that's true. It's true.
To be fair with you, because we're human beings and we're affected by manifestations, so how we relate to Moshe Emes v'Tidasei Emes is going to change. And it's going
so that's my point. So that's my point.
Okay.
I 100%
When you
concede
say
that.
Lubavitch is made up of a lot of people, it's important to clarify.
I mean that part of Lubavitch. I mean the lived experience. Right? There's people trying to connect or living their life around the sun. Let's say the sun is there. It's not going anywhere. But when it's harder to, let's say, to feel like you're all in orbit of the same sun, or one person says the sun's here, another person says the sun's over there, and it starts becoming, right, it's the orbit that I'm talking about, not the sun itself, right? I'm talking about the orbiting around the sun. And so that anecdote that you mentioned, although it's a kind of a throwaway anecdote, to me what it reveals is something that I've experienced and I've thought about a lot, which is, you know, the generation. One of the things that happened by Gimmel Tammuz, amongst many other things, is that the generations suddenly had a hard time communicating with one another. I'm not saying that they can't ever communicate again, or that they didn't get better at some point, but it does seem like the gap between generations became more pronounced, became more of a real thing.
Although I would say that in the Lameds and the Mems, there was also a gap of the generations.
100%.
It wasn't my generation because I wasn't there yet. But the people that we were looking up to in the Mems, you know, we're talking about the generation before them as their shishi, and you know, as disconnected.
Right.
So it's just because it was the most, I don't know if the word is major event, right, that took place in our lives. So therefore, that difference was the most highlighted. But you know this as well as everyone does, that besides for the fact if you're going a vertical from generation to generation, if you go horizontal, you know, whether it was before Gimmel Tammuz or after Gimmel Tammuz, there were plenty of differences and there were plenty of gaps
100%.
and chasms between people and groups.
100%.
So, and again, and because this was such a big thing, so therefore those differences were highlighted then as well.
100%. Anybody that says these things started by Gimmel Tammuz is being.
No, but I think it's important, and maybe you're going there, but it's important to because Moshe Emes v'Seirasei Emes, and because the Rebbe is an inyan nitzchi, so it may have taken on another form, and it may have taken on, but whatever was continued. Not everything that was, but there was the ability to live with the Rebbe and the ability to be a chassid of the Rebbe.
Right.
It continued.
Yeah,
it
right.
continues.
Right. So yeah.
Which is why I'm saying
we are getting
I understand
there.
that you want to you want to recognize the evolution of it.
Right.
But I think if we get stuck at the evolution of it,
we're going to get there.
Then because especially today, for me at least, the age I was then, the age I am now, and when I look back, the relationship that I have, let's say, with the Rebbe has I don't know what the right word is, but looking back then, it was birth pangs. Right. And it brought me to somewhere, that brought me to somewhere, that brought me to somewhere, that brought me to where I am today. And the ability to, despite everything that I went through, to be able to still feel like I can have a personal connection to the Rebbe.
Yeah, so that's exactly where I want to go. I'm not trying to dwell on the complications of it. I think it's, so you could ask, so why do I keep on pointing them out? Well, first of all, that might be my bias or my problem, but I feel the reason to point it out is because the narrative where everything just kind of works out on in the end, that's the narrative that everybody already has. Like, that's the going narrative. And I'm not trying to say that the narrative is wrong or try to upend the narrative, but I think when we kind of go through that narrative, to point out that it's not just a push it. And again, it's not to be like a smart aleck and just to point it out. You see, aha, I found it. I think it makes it more relatable to people, and it makes it more real to people when it's like, okay, let's not make believe like, yeah, this happened and then that happened and it's all, it's all beseder mesuder and it all makes sense. It took turns, it took time. There were challenges along the way. And these bumps, or whatever you want to call them, these bumps, these tensions, these contradictions, it makes it more alive, in my view. It makes it more relatable. It makes it more real. It makes it more honest. We don't have to. We could say that as a predicate at the beginning, that Moshe emes, and we believe that, but the way we get there now, after all these years, let's not make believe like it was a fairy tale. You know what I mean? That's the reason why I pointed out. Now, sometimes do I go too far with it? I don't know, but I was trying to get there because I know what we spoke about on the phone last week or on the WhatsApp last week, is that you said that you felt one way in the years after Gimmel Tammuz, and you felt eventually that wasn't the right way, and kind of evolved along. I think for that to make sense, it's first like everybody was, in a way, they found themselves on their own almost, and everybody had to figure it out in a way that worked for them, and that's what I was trying to set up. Does that make sense?
Okay. No, I get you. No, I think I understand now.
Yeah. Yeah, it can come across as like, oh, okay, so you're just trying to make everything complicated and sophisticated and academic and whatever, but that's not my goal. So let's talk about that. So you've set up where the rug has been pulled out from underneath your feet. How long would you say, or describe a little bit the initial kind of impulse to hold on, like that what I have to do now is to hold on. Like, one of the phrases that I remember being quoted for many years was, Yeshua, what's the word? Yeshua Masharas Layom Mashatechayel. There was that kind of feeling of, and each group of Lubavitch took it a different way, what exactly that meant, whether it's oil 770, whatever. I'm not going there now, but I'm saying the idea was that, like, you cannot, like, our job now is to be faithful. There was that famous video, The Faithful Shepherd, the Talmudim waiting. I don't know if you remember that. I think it was made for kids, but it was like, anyway, the idea of waiting faithfully, was that the initial feeling?
it's a little hard to pinpoint exactly like the exact evolution, but for quite some time. Well, first of all, we created. I'd say we as in me, but around me, I was in a world where there was a major koch in remaining connected to the Rebbe. Learning the shlichus of Tafshin Yud Tafshin Aleph, the Rishimis came out, and the Rishimis, at least the earlier ones, we learned them word for word. We knew them balpeh, every single word. Verbrengens, and videos weren't that big yet, but if we can get our hands on a video. Remember once I was actually at the oil, and someone had this was like shortly after the first house was bought, and we were sitting in the basement, and someone had a video, and we watched the Verbrengen, and we continue to do everything, according to what the Rebbe, what we understood from the Rebbe Sichos, what it takes to be connected to the Rebbe. To get to your point, because it's hard to go through month by month. To get to your point, for quite some time, everything that I'm talking about myself now.
Sure.
Everything that we did, I did, was permeated with a Bankish.
Right.
With a Bankish.
So in English, you would say that's a yearning, nostalgia.
I don't like the word nostalgia because I don't know exactly what it means.
Fair enough.
It could be interpreted in different ways.
Right.
Nostalgia could be a very positive thing, and it could be a very negative thing.
So what would you say is the English word? A yearning?
A longing.
A longing.
A
missing.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense because the mindset at that time was that and everything will revert back to exactly where it was.
Right.
That we know Mashiach is coming, and it's going to revert back to exactly where it was.
Yeah, like you said, for someone to not miss at that time would be like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. So whatever, and but the way I was raised or educated was that I continued going to yeshiva, the next yeshiva, the other yeshiva. Whatever it was, I ultimately got married, moved out on shlichus, whatever. I don't know. I end up saying, but everything in our life is we I'm not saying I'm a tzaddik or even anything close to that, and I had my own ups and downs. But b'chlalis, I was following what I thought was the right thing, to live with the Rebbe, to be connected to the Rebbe, to talk to my campers about the Rebbe, to talk with people, amiftzayim. Yeah, the Rebbe remained and remains the focal point of my Yiddishkeit.
Right.
And a lot of that was done with checklist items, which I like to call, Chitas Rambam,
right,
learning Sichos, and a lot of it was Hergeshem, whatever that would mean at that specific time. I would say that at a certain point, there was at a certain point, something started to shift.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember, a specific, but one of them, we were verbrengen, and it was, well, I'll go back even a little before that. Remember, I took my son to the oil for Shabbos. My son was 7 or 8 years old. Shabbos Gimmel Tammuz, and I still did not know, like, I didn't know, but I didn't know how I'm supposed to act. Like, I couldn't. I didn't have a Seder Mesuder. That's not setting it right. But Shabbos, not Shabbos. The day of Gimmel Tammuz was still the most difficult day of the year.
You do not have to act on Shabbos Gimmel Tammuz.
Not Shabbos or weekday. Like
Gimmel Tammuz b'chol.
I've always, besides for 1 year, I've always been at the oil for almost the entire mesivta of Gimmel Tammuz, and I just go into a bubble, so to speak.
You're just there,
and I try to do all the things I'm supposed to do, and that's it. But the point I'm making is that I'm watching my son, who's 7 or 8 years old. He's pushing to be on the front row to daven chakras by the oil itself,
right?
And he's comfortable. He's and it blew my mind. Like I discussed it with someone later that afternoon. I said, like, here I am, like I'm like outside of my own body, and this kid is like, he knows exactly where he's supposed to be. Right. He's just doing everything like, it didn't make any sense.
Well, like you were when you were 7 years old.
Yeah, true.
Right.
But he was in a different world than I was when I was 7 years old.
Right.
And for me, that was a very big turning point, where I began to see that how I feel is not necessarily how other people are going to feel. And maybe if other people are feeling different, maybe I have to shift a little bit how I feel.
Why?
Because maybe I can do better at being the person I'm supposed to be if I have a different, if I'm able to see let's call it a bigger picture.
You're saying you realize that there isn't one way to act after Gimmel Tammuz, is what you're saying.
Not just that, maybe the way I was stuck.
Right.
And I wasn't.
But until then, you felt that this was the way.
No, look.
Or you didn't realize it wasn't.
It's a weird way of explaining this, because it's like, we were doing all the things we're supposed to be doing, or at least relatively speaking.
Right.
But it was eye-opening to see that a child could be. It's like I would have thought about this, like the kid who grew up in the dungeon.
Right.
And he only knows the dark, but he wasn't in the dark.
Right.
So I might have thought, earlier I might have thought, well, it is dark.
Right.
And he just doesn't know it. But I began to change my perspective and say, maybe he's not in the dark.
Right. He's living his life.
He is living as a Hasidic boy, as a Chassid should live in the world and the situation that we are today. And that's incredible.
Right.
That's actually the most encouraging thing that I could actually experience at that time.
Right.
Fast forward a couple of years, and I was talking with some friends, whatever, Bankish. And one of my friends said to me, because our kids were there at the table, our kids, 16, 17, whatever. And one of my friends said to me, our kids have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know what you're talking about. Bankish to what?
Right.
Bankish to what?
Yeah.
And it threw me off my equilibrium at first.
Right.
Because I understood what he was saying. One day a year.
Right.
But I started thinking about it, and very, very seriously. You mentioned Yeshua, and I don't want to go into this whole thing, but something I once heard from my father about Yeshua and Kalev, which were both on the right side of the fence at their time.
Right.
My father once pointed out that Yeshua is not heard of. Kalev is doing all the speaking,
right,
and Yeshua is quiet.
Same with defending Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yes. And there's a part that the reason the Meraglim didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael is because they heard that Moshe wasn't going to go with them. There's a word from Shmuel Vital. And in Parshas Ba'aloischa, it says, Eldo the maiden misnab b'machana. So Rashi says they were saying that Moshe v'chulu v'Yeshua machnas Yisrael la'aretz. Right. So the Meraglim said, without Moshe we can't go. We can't survive Eretz Yisrael without Moshe. Kalev and Yeshua say no. If Moshe says we have to go, we have to go. So that's Adkan is from the Shmuel Vital, the son of Reb Chaim Vital. My father, he added to this that despite the fact that Yeshua and Kalev are going to go, and they know they have to go because they're going to do what Moshe wants of them, difficult as it might be.
Kalev's too excited about it.
No, that's not what he said. He said Kalev is going. Yeshua is steht auf in Zeit und weint bittere Tränen. Like he can't, he doesn't know how it's going to happen. So I mentioned this discussion to not about Yeshua and Kalev, but the discussion I had with my friends, I mentioned it to my son, and he said to me, you guys need more Kalev, and we need more Yeshua.
Very interesting.
And to me, that was a very mature and a very beautiful analysis of the tension. Yeah. That for some of us, we were still crying, figuratively speaking, and we were missing out on the shefa that's available to us today in the current matzav. Right. And for some that are growing up in this matzav, they're missing out on the shefa that one can get by connecting to the past.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Because a lot of people, I mean,
And this is a kid. I mean, so it was like, it came from a very sincere, innocent place. It wasn't like a intellectual person that sat down to analyze a matziv, and it was almost spontaneous. Like I told him about the Fabrengen we had last night, and I wanted to hear his take. And this was his response.
How old was he at the time?
16.
16, a Bochur.
15.
A Bochur. Yeah, it's that's in general a beautiful conversation, but I think I also like the framing of this Kalev and Yeshua, because a lot of times people like to frame this tension as Ephraim and Menashe. I think there's a sikha about it, like which there the tension is like past and future or past and present, which I don't like so much, because it's almost like those are opposites, and to me it feels almost a little bit too easy, and it doesn't get to the nub of it. What you're talking about is two people who are both cognizant of the present. They're both very much in the present, right? So it's like within, let's say, Ephraim, they're both in the present. Yeah. They're not. Neither of them are stuck in the past. They're both in the present. The shaila is, how do you deal with the present, right? How do you deal with the present that feels ripped away from the past? That feels ripped away from the past. That feels that it's not. It doesn't feel as a natural. The Bnei Yisrael saw, after everything Moshe Rabbeinu did, the natural thing was that he, the story ends, and this is how it's supposed to end, right? Until all the geschäften, but it was supposed to end because that's a story is supposed to have. It's supposed to make sense. You're supposed to take them in and Gula Shlema, right? And after everything they went through, that's what they would expect, and it gets cut off. And frankly, if we look at Tanakh, everything kind of downhill from there. Like we know, it was supposed to be. In a sense. Well, we were supposed to be a Gula, and we're in Golas thousands of years later, and it started. The beginning of that trajectory happened when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, right? Because the Gula didn't come, right? So, anyway, they're both walking into this new chapter that was not expected. It was a total detour from how it's supposed to be, and there's still two ways of doing it, and you should have both. Is what your son is saying. You should have both.
And
it's beautiful.
To say for myself is ever since that point, I have learned or tried to learn and tried to grow to be more, using his expression, more Kalev like,
right?
Without losing to the best of my ability.
Sure.
I'll tell you something. I hope it's okay if it's like a vart, but just a takeaway from the Likkutei Sichos, and I'm not yet. We're not talking about project yet.
We're getting there.
Okay, but and I've shared this numerous times. And just to give you the setting, we were Fabrengen. I'm saying there was a Fabrengen. It was actually at the IO a few years ago. It was Hey Teves, and I sat down. It was mostly the yeshiva, I think Baltimore and Chicago, and there was a shliach Fabrengen with him. Very nice, chashuva, important, wonderful shliach, someone I respect greatly, and he was going on and on about the Gute Zeiten. And technically, Hey Tevis is the one time, but it's a time.
Oh, it's a Hey Tevis Fabrengen.
It was Hey Tevis.
So during the week.
It was during the week. Okay. Yeah, I'm saying, and if you will, Vayam Elin is Karan Vanasim. Hey Tevis is a time that talking about the past is technically more acceptable than others. But anyway, the way
I've heard a thing or two about Hey Tevis over the years. Okay.
No, I'm saying,
I know some of the people. I'm related to some of the people.
I understand. This person from Fabrengen was not related to you.
Say that.
But anyway, but the signon of his Fabrengen, coupled with who his audience was, they were all, mesivta or shir aleph zal bachram.
Right.
It didn't sit well with me, based on my newer approach.
The new version.
Yeah. So I interjected and I said a word from the Friedrich Rebbe, very well known, that Amalek is Amalek Itzaitim.
Yeah.
So he went on and he actually dug his heels deeper into his, and it bothered me. Like I thought, it could be he got stuck, he got carried away a little bit, but here he was like almost emphasizing, how how the past is so relevant, so necessary,
Right.
whatever. So almost out of desperation, I started arguing with him, and I had like a thought from a sikha that came, and I'm going to share it with you, if you let.
If I let,
Whatever. Saying like it's very short. The Rebbe asks a question. You probably know the sikha. Everyone knows the sikha. But what was the big deal about figuring out Pari's dream? Like technically, you have 7 healthy cows, means there's food. 7 is number 7. Like, why was it such a big deal?
right,
And only Yosef could figure out the dream. And then the Rebbe, within that, the Rebbe asked a second question: Why did Yosef give advice?
Right.
Like who asked? Like he asked to interpret the dream.
right,
So the Rebbe says that the dream would have been totally understood. There was one detail in the dream that threw off everyone, and that detail is that it says in the pasuk that when the unhealthy cows come out of the water, they stand beside the healthy cows. So now you have 14 cows side by side.
right,
So the Rebbe says, Zman, time is cyclical. So if the interpretation of the dream is 7 years and 7 years, then the first 7 years have to go away before the new 7 years come.
right.
So none of the Chartumim Mitzrayim could figure out
What's pshat?
what's pshat. Comes Yosef HaTzadik and he interprets the dream, and he says, no, you could have good and bad in the same time. You could have they could be simultaneous. How do you do that? For that you need eitzes, and they should give the eitzah of to appoint someone to collect the grain and the food from the good years to have them for the later years. So I said like this. I said, you and I will both agree that we're in Sheva Shnei Arov,
Right.
and I know that not everyone agrees with that, but for the sake of that
You and him, it's a story.
exactly exactly. You and I will agree. The Mashiach is not here yet. We can't see the Rebbe Gashmias.
Right.
It's Rov.
Right.
But Chartumim Mitzrayim claim that it's just too bad.
If it's Rav, it's Rav.
We're in years of famine, and we just have to daven for Mashiach to come, and until Mashiach comes,
Right.
we're stuck.
Right.
And Yosef HaTzadik, which the Rebbe very often used that as a euphemism for Yosef Shebederenu, referring to the Rebbe, comes and has a whole other approach. Right. And he says, inside of the Shnei Arav, you can have Sava.
Right.
As long as you lean on, you utilize the tevua that was collected for you, and it's not a thing of the past.
Beautiful.
It's because we have it now in the present.
Right.
We have oitzris that are filled with heroes and maimarim and sichos and guidance from the Rebbe on how to be a chassid, how to be connected to the Rebbe, that we can have sava inside of the Shnei Sarav.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And I've repeated this a number of times because to me,
Was he Makabel?
what?
Was he Makabel?
I think a story has to have an ending.
Like, no, I'm just being against it.
I know. I don't remember. I don't remember. That there was a major breakthrough.
Okay,
exactly.
sorry. So go ahead.
But no. But I've repeated this a number of times to other people, whatever, because I think that this, for me, is a way for me to understand exactly, for me at least, where I am today. I can't make peace with saying that today is Shnei Sasava.
Right.
Even just the fact that Mashiach is not here,
Right.
and how much the Rebbe spoke about and begged for Mashiach and cried for Mashiach, wants Mashiach and wants us to bring Mashiach. To say that we're in Shnei Sasava now, it just doesn't jive for me.
Right.
But to say Chas v'Shalom that a child, a Mekurev, a me, growing up today, that I don't have access to the same tools or similar tools, but the same objective.
Same grain.
Yes, that I'm not either ready to accept.
Right.
Which means that a Bochur today can be a chassid and can be a mekusher and has access to everything that he needs to be a chassidish Bochur, chassidish girl, chassidish couple, chassidish home, whatever it is. It's whatever we need, we have.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we don't miss the past.
Right.
Doesn't mean that there wasn't something in the past that was and is incredible, and that we want that and we want to connect to that.
Right.
But not having that cannot, chas v'shalom, be a reason or an excuse to not be the best us we can be today.
Yeah. I mean, the story of Yosef HaTzadik is a perfect, in many ways, it would seem to be a perfect mashal to this, because I think everybody in Mitzrayim would have liked for the fields to still, be growing. Like it's not the optimum situation where you basically have to come for a handout from this granary, and you're not gonna. It's not like you said. It's not shnei sava. It's shnei rav, but that's around you, right? The fields are barren, but and the world may look different around you. But if you've had foresight, or the Yosef Tzaddik has had foresight to put away things for you, you could still be nourished, right? And you're that's where it's a beautiful way of looking at it. Where again we come to the word tension, but the past and present don't collide with one another. The past, or what things that something that was stored in the past is the present. That's the beautiful thing that you just said that I heard from what you said.
Yes.
If you look at the past as something that was basically spent in the past, like a memory and experience that was spent. Yeah, I'm thinking now even like, maybe it'd be a little bit against my persona, but like, a zichrenis, like a tkiyas of Rosh Hashanah. If it's portrayed as something that happened and was spent, like it happened and it's over, and now we just have to remember the past, that doesn't sit well with me. What do you're just making me feel bad. I get nothing from that. But if that was a memory, even a memory, and I'm not talking about a sikha or a mind, we're talking about pushing a memory or a story that was stored in the past, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's a powerful memory, who knows how much nourishment it can give. But then it's in the present. It's all about how you look at it, right? Right? Is that you want to have it? You're looking at it as a current of the tkiyas, let's say, or a kafis. Is it something that happened in the past and ended in the past? I don't see the what comes out of that. But if it happened in the past for it to be stored in the hearts and minds of people, so that some message could be shared down the road, then it's in the present. It's not in the past. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yes. And that's why, and that's why. In other words, despite the fact that I very, very, very much believe that in today's day, especially because time has passed and in the human condition, we're able to evolve or accept certain things that were harder to accept years ago. So I very much believe that as we raise our children, as we raise ourselves, as we raise our mikuravim, that we're raising them with a Rebbe in the present. I'm not comfortable with divorcing ourselves of the past,
right?
Or even to say that everything that we had then we have now.
Right.
What I would say is that for those things that we don't have then, for those things that we had then that we don't have now, we have other things that could accomplish the same thing or a very, very similar thing. But and again, I understand that I'm old enough to have at least some zichronis,
right.
And I wish I had more, which I know for some is already, you don't need zichronis. Because of the age that I was, till today, I wish I was a little bit older and I had a few more zichronis and a few more things to remember. I think that for me, it animates me and it keeps me alive in the present.
Right.
But I have a very difficult time with divorcing ourselves from the past and saying, that was then, there was a derashishi, that was how they dealt. Right. Then there was this tkufa, and now there's another tkufa, and this is how it's meant to be. And I know that hashgacha pratis is hashgacha pratis.
Right.
But I'll just if we're quoting people, my shver, at least I don't know if he still uses the same expression, but when I had just gotten married and I spent Yom Tov there, was Mitzvah Pesach, Mitzvah Achen Shel Pesach, and he was putting away the dishes. And he said, "Medav kedenken, das ist Seder from Bentzi Seder." In other words, putting away the dishes is what people do after Pesach.
Right.
But until 7-8 years before that, Mitzvah Pesach, you were standing on the bleachers watching the Rebbe give Kish Bracha.
Right.
So we got to do what we got to do. Medav kedenken, das ist Seder from Bentzi Seder. I don't know if he would still use those expressions today. Probably he's a Isha Emes. He's probably by him the time passing doesn't affect as much. But there is an inyan in realizing,
right,
where we are today and what we don't have today. And it doesn't have to be a letdown for today's children or today's us, because the Rebbe and the Eibishter, gave us the koiches
Right.
to be chassidim today with everything that we have today. But at the same time, the avar is mara Allah, the mara Allah hoiva.
I'm a couple what you're saying. I mean, I can't speak for others. I hear what you're saying. I think the problem originates when people pit the two against one another, right? So it's like you said, you're sitting at that Fabringen, and that person, we don't know who it is, but that person, and everybody has met such people or been by such Fabringens. That person is basically pitting the Ovar against the Heve. He wants the whole space to be about the Ovar. And I'm not saying that he did it maliciously. I don't even know who you're talking about, but it could well be that that's what he lives with, right? But he wants the whole room that's in the present to be dominated by the Ovar. You had already kind of grappled with it, so you weren't trying to get rid of the Ovar, you're trying to calibrate the two. But there are people who get so annoyed by that and get so put off by that, they're like, okay, you know what? Ovar away, hoive, right? They're just pushing back another direction. So when you have the two at odds, that's what ends up happening. It becomes which one wins. What I think you're suggesting, at least what I'm hearing from you, it doesn't have to be a fight, right? The beautiful story about Yosef HaTzadik and that Sicha that you mentioned is that the Ovar and the Hoive, they don't have to be, like you said, time doesn't have, the 14 cows are standing together. They're all, in that moment, they're all there, right? One of the things, I'm not some big maskil, not some academic. I haven't researched Rebbe's Torah, but one of the things that's very common in the Rebbe's Torah is seeing things as layers. Like I'll say, all of this is true in the chitzenis and nefesh, but in the pnimis and nefesh, it's gar anders, right? And there's always layers.
It's funny that you say that, because I was going to say it almost the exact opposite.
Okay, if I care, make it interesting.
No, I'm saying that and this is part of my thinking, is that there's so much in the Rebbe Sichos about davar v'yifuchai, that a yid is a davar v'yifuchai.
That's what I'm saying, though. Well, I'm saying layers as opposed to davar v'yifuchai.
Layers would mean that there's one layer on top.
But a lot of times it's davar v'yifuchai. So like the obvious example.
If that's what you meant, then I
didn't know. I wasn't thinking of the words davar v'yifuchai, but a lot of times it opens up possibilities of davar v'yifuchai. So, for example, one of the Gemaras that the Rebbe loved to quote was Hayat Mekdesh Yamanashani Tzadik Gomer, but the guy's not a Tzadik Gomer, but because because he could be, so he is, and then Chassidus would be, in the Chitzenis he looks one way, but in Pnimius he's the opposite way, right? So it's almost like a way of davar v'yifuchai, not because of some noisei afachim, but by categorizing or layering things on top of one another, especially in madrigas of Ruchni, you can end up having layers that they coexist even though they would seem not to be able to coexist. Does that make sense? You can have a person who on the outside looks one way, but in Pnimius, the Rebbe is insisting that he's a tzaddik gomer, even though b'chitzeni it's not at all.
So I was coming from a little bit of a different perspective, but I was one of the classic Fabrengens that come to my mind, where the Rebbe talks about this, is the Fabrengen of Chav Cheshvan Tavshim Amalef, which is the 120 years from the Rebbe Rashab's birth,
right?
And he speaks about Me'ayin Yavei Azri, Eis Shemayim V'Aretz, that by a Yid it comes from Ayin, but it comes down in Aretz. And in that Farbrengen, the Rebbe says that a person could be sitting here in Brooklyn on a Wednesday, and the Rebbe says the year, and at the same time you could be at Har Sinai.
Right. And
that's a davar v'yifuchai.
Okay.
And by the Rebbe, those two things were b'chalal not a stira.
Not a stira.
Once you train your brain to think like that, if not to think like that, at least to understand that that's possible, that there's such a possibility, then a lot of the tensions, right, are able to be less tension, or at least able to coexist, right? Because as a neshama and a guf is a davar v'yifuchai. Ruchnis is a davar v'yifuchai. Ruchnis and gashmius. And this example that I'm giving, the Rebbe is telling people that we should, at the Farbrengen, that we should pretend for a few minutes that we are at Har Sinai. Right. And you're sitting in Brooklyn. So it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It's not a stira. Because a yid is characterized as a davar v'yifuchay, and he could be in Brooklyn and at Arsina at the same time, which means that a yid could be in Tavshin Pei Dalid with all of the challenges that Tavshin Pei Dalid brings with it, and he could also be chassid, a mekusher, live with the Rebbe, be alive, even though he's missing certain things, not because necessarily it makes sense, but because a yid is by definition a davar v'yifuchay.
Right.
Which is the same thing as the Vatamoid, as the Sikh about Yisvat Tzadik.
The goal is ultimately, whether you characterize it as layers or as davar v'yifuchay, the goal is to see these two things not as a competition, and not as a collision.
100%.
I think so much of what I perceive to be the conflict between generations today, or in general the challenges or the discourse that people have, a lot of it is because it's one or the other, or if you have this, you can't have that. And the goal is to realize that everything comes from the Eibishter, right? I think that's a point of the person who said it's Hashgacha Pratis, or the people that say Hashgacha Pratis. And the question is, how do you figure out to have both? Not to leave this or leave that, to have both. So let's, before we run out of time, how does Project Likkutei Sichos, or describe how all of this thinking led to Project Likkutei Sichos?
Okay. So let's. They don't necessarily have to be 1 + 1 = 2.
No.
Although obviously it had to be connected. But in reality, I have to mention two of my chaverim. Shmuley Nachlis was a shliach in Toronto, and Yisrael Wilhelm was a shliach in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
Shmuley Nachlis grew up in Detroit, so I know him as
he's a classmate.
We grew up together. Yisrael came. I first met Yisrael summer Tafshin and Dalad in camp in Detroit.
He's from England?
He's from England. And later we were in yeshiva together in Miami. And we are, Baruch Hashem, very, very good friends. And time to time, we fabring on the phone. We were fabricating on the phone. It was Hey Davis.
This was before this whole episode with your son, or after?
Probably after.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably. But not necessarily. I don't know.
Around that time.
Around the same time. Anyway, it was Hey Davis. I was actually driving to Crown Heights. And we were on the phone. We were fabricating. I obviously was not saying l'chaim. And we were talking. And we had this idea that we would, the three of us, we would learn, we should go back to the beginning, and we should learn Likkutei Sichos, to be honest, because when I was 16, 17 years old, the Shimis was such a major part of my life. So I didn't, invest sufficient time and effort and energy into Likkutei Sichos, or whatever other excuse you might come up. I was lacking in that area, and we had this idea that we should anyway. As the idea evolved, we had an idea. Maybe we make a WhatsApp group, 70 guys, because it was a month before Yud Shvat Shivim Shana.
Okay, so it's 3 years ago.
So it's 4 years ago.
Touch and pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll have 70 guys, and we'll have a thing every week. Another guy will give a shir, and we'll whatever, and we'll go through Likkutei Sichos. 70 became 140. 70 chavrusas. Okay. And we spoke again Friday day, and we said we're doing this. This is real. Anyway, over Shabbos, Shmuley Nachlis had a farbring in Toronto, and he spoke about this idea, and a lot of interest. It piqued a lot of interest. And we spoke after Shabbos, and we said, why limit it to a group? Why not make a website and try to? Anyway, we threw up a website, and the numbers came flying in. It made absolutely no sense. I don't remember exactly. I think it was 7,000 people by the time Yud Shvat came around. It was just numbers came flying in.
This is right before COVID, right?
Right before COVID, exactly.
Yeah.
And we found some Agadi Shurim. We put up a website in time for Yud Shvat, which was when we would start to figure out which halakim to start, whatever. By Yud Shvat, we had a website up, projectlikkutei.org, and we had shiurim for Parshas B'Shalach. And incredibly, incredibly the project it there's no words to explain why it took and how it took, but it took interest from people across the spectrum, ages, many males, females, women that are doing it, and we just continued. We continued to keep up, and more Magidish Shurim. And if we're talking about it, I would just like to give a shout out to the people who give shiurim every single week. So some guys that do both. We do 2 sichos a week usually, both sichos every single week. Some do 1 sicha for over 4 years now, haven't missed a week. It's incredible, and they're not doing it for pay.
Right.
So yeah, and what happened is, I mean, we can focus on a couple of things, but number one, we keep on hearing from people how unbelievable, people I say I haven't missed a week, and it's changed my life. Sometimes we hear a story here, there, a guy that was, wavering in his Yiddishkeit, Lubavitch, but that was, wasn't so, and started doing this, and after a while, his beard got longer, and, he started wearing tzitzis every day. And I'm saying we over the course, we don't hear most of the feedback because
right.
It's a very fragmented, like there's no community. Everyone is in their own place,
right.
Doing, learning and doing, but and then
if you stop the project, you'll get feedback.
It's for sure. Not only that, this week there's only 1 sicha.
Then you get feedback.
The people were wondering, what's the second sicha? And when we did 3 sichas, they said, I can't do 3 sichas, it's too much. And we did 1 sicha, wondering, why only 1 sicha? Whatever. And there's a WhatsApp group or a few that discuss the sichas. I ran into someone yesterday. He saw ha'ara last week. It said, V'im shagisi Hashem yechaper. He said, like, if not for the Project Likkutei Sichos, I would have never known that the Rebbe writes in ha'ara V'im shagisi. Like, it's not a common thing for the Rebbe to write. And things like that, and certain sichos that would have never gotten learned by the amount of people that are learning them on the depth level that they're being learned. And I will say this, shortly after the project started, maybe a month or 2, I was talking to my father, and my father said to me something that we were thinking it, but he said it in ICS. He said, "Gone are the days that you could raise a generation on, I say this, I don't say this." Various different things that are said or aren't said, which was a passion that existed and actually motivated us at a certain time in our lives. He said that passion doesn't work today. And today you have to have substance. And Likkutei Sichos is substance. Not that it's the only substance, I want to be clear.
But gone are the days where you just listen to your father saying...
No. Tavshinun Hey, Tavshinun Vav. We fought with each other over various different...
gone are the days where I believe this and you believe
correct,
that, and
correct.
I belong to this side of the fence and you belong to that side of the fence.
Correct, and that passion was enough to
fights, yeah.
to keep a person going,
right.
And it worked. I mean, sadly, but it worked.
Right.
To a certain degree, to certain people, and I shouldn't really call it it worked because the price was heavy,
very high.
Heavy and sad.
Right.
But there were certain people that were able to keep a passion alive because of that.
Right.
But you fast forward to where we are today, or even 5 years ago, that passion doesn't work, and today it only goes with substance, and Likkutei Sichos is substance. And over the course of the 4 years of learning Likkutei Sichos, and besides the fact that I myself giving a shir every single week, I've come out of my own shell to a certain degree. I go to speak places, if I bring here, there, nothing major. But the fact that I'm sitting in front of you today, right. I would 5 years ago I would have never been brave enough to sit here. Honestly, because what am I going to say and what will people think? But it had. I'm not even talking ruchni, especially even begashmis. It helped me, but at the same time, there's a certain, and I do want to say. In my specific case, I'm talking about me, is my wife teaches the Sicha. My wife learns the Sicha, which sometimes we learn together. And she teaches it here in Tammuz River, once a week in Tammuz River, once a week in Lakewood, to ladies, obviously. My wife makes a poem on the Sicha. My kids make these little animated videos, 3-4 minute videos every single week. And it's incredible to see that it permeated into the fabric of our home. The other day I was driving home from New York and I called my wife. I had given a shiur, and I was giving my wife some tips based on the shiur that I gave. And then we were on the phone for quite some time talking about the sikha and the pshat and how to present it. And then I sat there and I think we're a weird couple. Like this is what we're talking about on the phone. Like
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that that it has a very, very healthy impact, not just on me, but on the kids growing up in the house. And I want to say something else. And this is not Likkutei Sichos, but I want to say something else. It's been sitting since that last conversation, since that text. It's been sitting in my head. One of my kids said to me that they were somewhere with a family friend, and they had a conversation, and it was not a good conversation. That's what that quote and unquote. What's pshat? It was a person that's a little bit more modern, and it said things, about the Chassidish lifestyle. Let's say that whatever, not to get too carried away. I don't know. I wasn't there, and I didn't get chazara, but I understood. Anyway, so I said to my daughter, and I said, when is the last time that person opened up a Likkutei Sichos? So my daughter rolled her eyes at me like, I do Likkutei Sichos.
Everything's Likkutei Sichos, right?
So I said, generally I try to be careful, not to be too pushy about it. I try to I'm not pushing it at anyone's throat, but I want to say something. I'm saying to this child of mine, and I said, how do you expect someone to have a healthy perspective, even a balanced perspective of Elam Haza, that they live in and work in, but also at the same time a perspective, the Rebbe's perspective of Torah, of Chassidus.
Right.
If you haven't opened a sefer in 10 years,
right,
just because you went to yeshiva or high school, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're any profession, you have to constantly read up. You have to constantly refresh your memory. Certainly, there's going to be new, in certain fields, there's going to be new technologies that are going to come up, that if you're an amazing doctor and you came out of school in 1985, right, and you didn't read any of the, you can't be a doctor today.
Right. So
how do we expect a person to have a healthy approach to whatever the subject is, if the person didn't open up a sefer in 10 years? Right. When I say Chitas is Rambam, but a person has to, if you don't care, you don't care, that's fine. But if you want to say this is a healthy, fair, balanced perspective,
if you have an idea, you have to open up a sefer.
Yeah, I'm not saying that to sound coy. I'm saying that
it's not elitist.
In the Olam Haza world that you come from,
right,
if the doctor spoke like you speak about Chassidus, about medicine, then you would look at them like they're crazy.
Right.
Because they're speaking about medicine that was applicable 20 years ago.
Right.
So in this case, there's no new technology. But the reality is that so many of the Rebbe Sichos and Mamorim and Torah, and for that matter, Blatter Gemara, and for that matter, Chassidus from the previous Rebbeim, that to us, to our generation, is Chadashim Mamish.
Right.
We don't know what it says, we never learned it. Not just V'im Shagisi Hashem Yichaper, but Pashat topics, ideas. And as we go through the Sichos, there's so many things. I mean, this is a more famous one, Vayechi. That how did they survive? How is it Vayechi gelept in Mitzrayim? Right. Because there was a yeshiva.
Right.
And the Rebbe explains this Hayomim is the story. The Rebbe explains the story at length. What Yaakov was worried about, that Yaakov wasn't worried about himself, because the way we understand the story is that how did Yaakov live? The Rebbe says Yaakov was in the Neshamat Atzilus. Right. Yaakov was worried about the Shvatim. Shvatim and Neshamas Debiyah. How are Neshamas Debiyah going to survive in the Mitzrayim? And the answer is through Limud Torah. And my father would add to that, whose Torah were they learning? Yaakov Avinu's Torah. Right. Yaakov was the Nasi. Right. But fine, that's a little Chassidish Avetel. But the point is as you go through the Likkutei Sichos, it not only does it shift your perspective and how to learn. I'll give you one more.
As much as you want.
I'll give you 10 more if you want. I'm saying like that one more that talks the tension. And again, the Vartas on the Likkutei Sichos, and I sort of, I was learning with someone here. We learn every Sunday morning, so I gave my neufich delay. But the Sikha that
I'm going to write a disclaimer at the bottom of the podcast.
Okay. What, that the music is from someone else?
No, that this is not. It's not.
No, I'm making the disclaimer. So when it's a sikha, it's a sikha.
Yeah. Okay.
When it's whatever.
Okay,
but in the Sikha Parshas Truma, the Rebbe asked, why is the whole parsha called Truma if only the very beginning is about donations?
Right.
The Rebbe answers that the word Truma is Melashon Haroma, to uplift. And the uftu of the Mishkan was to uplift the Gashmias.
Right.
And they explains that it has been little by little. And the Rebbe explains the contrast between Matan Torah and the building of the Mishkan. And then there's like a Besignan Acher, which clearly was written by the Rebbe, because it's all Hebrew and hyphens. And the Rebbe wrote Besignan Acher, Matan Torah, Bittel Atachten, or Atachtonim. Binyan HaMishkan, Zichachata, or Hizdachachos Atachtonim. I don't remember the exact word. Zichachat Atachtonim. Which basically means, but Matan Torah, the oil was so powerful that it overpowered and overwhelmed and was Mevatel the Tachten. But the idea of the Mishkan is to slowly but surely refine the Tachten.
Right.
So I said to my Chavrusa over here, I said, before Gimmel Tammuz, when the Rebbe was verbringing, it was Bittel HaTachten. Like, not everyone was a fully durchgetanen chassid, but just being in the Rebbe's presence and hearing the Rebbe's words, that had an effect on the person. That at least in that moment, for sure, there was a Bittel HaTachten. Today, it's harder to have that level of oir, to access that level of oir, to be Bittel HaTachten. But today, we have through learning the Rebbe's Torah and through going through a gradual process of inculcating into ourselves and meshing our brain with the Rebbe's Torah, we have the ability of his dachachos atachtonim, the ability to refine ourselves and grow, which maybe in a time when there was a ribui oyer, it was harder to grow. And it might touch upon the contrast to the Shishi, where there was more of a focus on learning, maybe. And you could say that the Shas in the Tkufa, of when the Rebbe was here physically, Begashmias, so the Rebbe was constantly giving us instructions, hirois. Of course, the Rebbe wants us to learn, and the Rebbe always wanted us to learn. And the Rebbe told us to learn, and obviously, the obvious doesn't have to be said, or shouldn't have to be said. But my son and his ilk will argue with me if it sounds in any way, shape, or form that I say there's a maila in today over the past, because chas v'shalom to say that. But I'm not saying I'm not pitting one against the other, but I'm saying in the time that we live in today, we have the ability to learn Likkutei Sichos, and for that matter, the Rebbe's Mamorim and Torah in general. If we do so on a regular basis, and especially, I think there is something very unique about Likkutei Sichos, and the more I learn, the more that a mimer is a mimer entails a lot of emunah, like. As much as Havana Vasaga that there isn't a mimer, and I know that
it's a delivery mamayl.
And I know people like my Zeda would be horrified that I said
you think so?
To a certain degree, I know there was, in other words,
the Rebbe closes his eyes, and even the Rebbe Shabbos like that. They close their eyes.
There's a certain level in which I'm accepting, and then I have to make sense of what I accepted.
Yeah.
In Likkutei Sichos, the Rebbe presents it to you in such a logical way. That certain ideas that you might have thought, if you didn't hear it from the Rebbe, were radical concepts. I can't think of any examples right now off the back of my head, but I remember once where the Rebbe spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu, about there's a daga that's higher than Kamaycha. There's a halt Kamaycha, and there's a daga that's higher than Kamaycha, which seems like Kamaycha is impossible.
Right.
And the Rebbe, it fits right in. If you just learn the pasuk and you just learn the Rashi, you just learn the Zohar, it can't be any other way. And ad k'dei kach, that it makes so much sense in your head that your brain begins to think differently. And it's really a very beautiful thing when you're able to, when you have those moments when you see, wow, I really truly get this. That my own gashmistic brain that is filled with other things that shouldn't be there necessarily, and still it can grasp the Rebbe's approach to this. It's very uplifting. It's very uplifting. I mean, you saw upstairs where I record myself. A lot of the times I record myself at night. The kids are sleeping already, and it's dark and it's quiet. So but by the time I sit down, it could be mamish late, and I get up and I'm just sweating. I'm talking to a camera. I'm talking to nobody. Not even talking to one person in front of me. But you get into it and you get into it, and it's so beautiful and it's so geschmack. that it's, and then I can't fall asleep afterwards. I'm like awake. I'm awake. It's 2:00 in the morning, and Yisrael, it's 3 hours earlier by him. He texts me. He says, "Go to sleep." I can't sleep. So I'm just saying, I don't think I'm unique. I really think that this is a nachlas haklal. I think the Rebbe had an incredible geschmack in it. The Rebbe said this to someone, "Have a geschmack in them." I think the Rebbe invested hours. Rabbi Shapiro always talks about this. Rabbi Leibel Shapiro, man, he always talks about it. He invests hours and hours and hours. There was once a Farbrengen. I said it out loud once at a speech, and I got it wrong, so I won't give dates. But someone was falling asleep in the middle of the Farbrengen, in the middle of a Rashi Sicha, and the Rebbe said, I was up a whole night preparing this Rashi. So I thought to myself, I was up a whole night preparing the Rashi. Then the Rebbe teaches the Rashi. Then the Rebbe gets the Rashi for the Likkut for Hagah, and the Rebbe's Magia the Sicha. Then it was given to the Rebbe for a second Hagah, at least sometimes a third, but usually two. The Rebbe was Magia, and then Simchas Torah Tavshin Chavtes, the Rebbe said that when he gets the finished Likkut, he sits down and learns it again from scratch.
Mamish.
Yeah, the Rebbe said so loud in the scratch. And I heard from someone that in the Rebbe's house there are likutim with the Rebbe's edits.
After it was already printed.
After it was printed, and after all that, so someone told me that in the Rebbe's house there are likutim with hagoyis from the Rebbe on it. So you just count the hours. You're just talking about. I don't know that every single sikha took the same amount of time to edit, but Rabbi Shapiro says that sometimes it was 8 to 10 hours. Right. So maybe that was the first. If you think about it, it accumulates at least to 25, 30 hours on one likkut. Right. So if you're talking about eitzlis that the Rebbe set aside for us, especially if we know that
eitzlis that Yosef prepared.
Eitzlis that Yosef prepared, then this is one of those eitzlis, and this has it has the godly, the al-tivi, the supra-rational ability to lift up a person and connect them to the Rebbe, and you do it with your family, and it literally changes a person's life.
What a wonderful note to end the conversation, or to not end the conversation, to start the new conversation. Yeah. The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.